to the astrology interview with me, Sue Brain. I'm so delighted to have Dan Waits from the World Astrology Report with me today, and where both of us are fascinated by the same question: how does astrology work? And if you think about it, just reading an astrology chart is really kind of just looking at a simple diagram on a piece of paper with a kind of few astrological symbols on it. And so how can that reveal the depth of a person's life or forecast a major cultural shift? How is this possible? And I think it's really interesting, and this is why Dan and I are here. So many contemporary astrologers see astrology less as this kind of causal mechanism and more like a science of consciousness. I don't know if Dan's going to agree with me here, though. And Western astrology, for instance, kind of follows the zodiac, the tropical zodiac, which aligns with the seasons, not with the movements of the stars. Yet astrology works for us, Western astrology. So if astrology maps patterns in consciousness rather than external forces, how does that change our understanding of what's really going on? So, Dan, let's dive in. Just such a simple question, isn't it? How does astrology work? So astrology obviously has been practiced for thousands of years, yet it kind of resists a single tidy explanation. So how do you think astrology has never been pinned down to one theory or mechanism?
Yeah,
What's
that's
going
the
on?
big question.
Yeah.
Well, as we were discussing earlier, my thinking on this and the reason why it's never been pinned down to a single mechanism is because there isn't a single mechanism. I think astrology and the way it works is probably as multifaceted as the way the cosmos itself works, as the way life works. I don't think you can ever pin it down to something, as simple as, say, a certain force that acts on us, which, this kind of explanation is often cited as a bit of a sort of straw man argument against astrology, often by physicists and scientists and so forth, right? Because they'll say, well, how could gravity, from the planets possibly explain, what my personality is like, and so forth. And the reason that they're doing that is they're just projecting their own way of seeing the world onto astrology and assuming it has to work that way. But I would argue, that it's like it can't be boiled down to a single mechanism. And as we'll hopefully get into, I think it's going to be actually lots of things all like happening at the same time that go together.
I'll tell you what, another thing is, before we get into that, another thing that fascinates me that sets up, I think, this whole thing is how Western, Vedic, Mayan, Chinese, whatever you want to call it, all the different systems that have been used throughout all time, they all have a sort of their own symbolic framework, and they all work. So if the big sort of the argument, isn't it, between the Western astrologer and the Vedic astrologer, is the Western astrologer doesn't look at the stars anymore, and the Vedic astrology is aligned to the stars, so it's more accurate, and they're more accurate. But then Western astrology, it works. Mayan astrology works. So I'm just so interested in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I think any explanation for astrology, it has to reckon with that. It has to factor that in. As an example that people often like to cite is how in Mayan astrology, Venus is seen as a war planet.
Yeah.
And you can argue in Western astrology, Venus, when she's in her morning rising, she's more warlike and so forth. And there is that side to it, but really that does not really encompass what Venus is in our system of astrology. So any explanation has to factor all this in. And something that I've thought about is collective consciousnesses. Like they're maybe not the collective consciousness, not just being kind of one collective consciousness, but kind of being an aggregation of multiple collective consciousness fields, maybe, if you like, that different cultures and civilizations and ways of thinking are kind of drawing from, and then they somehow create astrologies that um, work for their own kind of symbolic systems or something like that.
Yeah, well, then we have to bring in archetypes, don't we? Because that's something that we can vaguely grasp. Do you not think?
Yes, for sure. I think we definitely have to. We also have to factor in archetypes and how they may have developed and what they are
Yes.
ultimately. Yeah, and I think you have to go to Rupert Sheldrake as well as part of any explanation.
Yeah.
I think his ideas on morphic fields are going to probably have to factor into any ultimate explanation of astrology. Because for those of you who aren't aware, Sheldrake has
Yeah.
this theory of essentially that nature has a memory, and that once something is done for the first time in nature, it can be done again more quickly because there's this kind of memory in the cosmos that
In the
this thing has been
collective.
done. Yeah, this thing has
Mm,
been done and now it can be done again. And he gives all these examples of, say, they do studies with rats and they have to
yeah.
solve a puzzle. And if they solve a puzzle in New York, then when they repeat the experiment again at the other side of the world, the rats will solve the same puzzle more quickly. And he
Yeah.
argues this is because of these things called morphic fields, which essentially kind of serve as a kind of inherent memory in the cosmos. So what are archetypes and how do they connect to astrology and how do they connect to that? Well, can it be that kind of over the course of the cycles that we track, things that happen to consciousness, in consciousness, are somehow recorded and
Yeah.
then become more easy and more can happen again more easily? That's what I would wonder.
I'm fascinated by that whole morphic resonance, but also some archetypes die off. Because if you think about the generational archetypes, so I'm in the Pluto in Leo generation, and we're all heading off towards the end of the conveyor belt. So our very strong archetype that we're carrying will die off as we die off. There may be a vague memory of it, but it won't be a living archetype like we are living out at the moment. Does that make sense to you?
I see what you're saying, but I wouldn't say that you will die off because the contributions of the Pluto and Leo generation that they've made to the field of the Leo archetype somehow
Yes.
that will be stored in the memory of the cosmos, perhaps we could say.
But I don't think it'll be so dynamic because we won't be here. Anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole, but I'm really interested in this. I know how archetypes live and die, or the memory, or they become anyway. We're digressing, but anyway, we'll just flag that one up. I think the other thing for me, and I'm really up with you with Rupert Sheldrake and his morphic resonance. I think, and the first time I ever heard of it was the monkey washing his potato in the sea, and then all the other monkeys in the other islands started to wash their potatoes in the sea. I think that's fascinating. What about Robert Temple? And because he wrote A New Science of Heaven and describing the universe. I don't really understand this, Dan, so help me out. As self-organizing, but also this whole concept of being conscious, and that brings up panpsychism into the conversation, which is very Rupert Sheldrake-y, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And honestly, I can't claim to understand all these ideas either. Quite frankly, I think these are really complicated
Yeah.
ideas that you kind of have to do a lot of reading up on just to understand, say, Sheldrake's ideas or Robert Temple's ideas. And I'm not properly across like any of them really, but these are all things that clearly seem to be relevant to what astrology is all about. And yeah, as you say, Robert Temple published this book, A New Science of Heaven, on plasma physics.
Yeah.
Plasma being this fifth state of matter, and he essentially argues that if you look at plasma, which is actually 99% of the universe,
Seen universe.
seen universe,
Yeah.
right?
Sorry,
It's
don't want to jump in, but I got very corrected the other day.
oh, yeah. Well, I'd get corrected as well then, obviously. But thank you. Yeah, seen universe. It's 99% of that,
Yeah.
and he argues that if you look at how plasma behaves, it essentially displays a lot of the same characteristics that life does. It organizes itself into structures. It has what looks like metabolic processes where there's energy being transferred and all sorts of things. And this isn't just Temple's idea. There's a lot of
Yeah.
scientists converging on this as possible. And so then you have to think, well, is therefore the sun itself conscious? This is a question that Sheldrake has asked in an essay: is the sun conscious?
Yeah.
And if obviously people since the beginning of time have kind of assumed that the sun was alive and is some kind of being. This was an idea I think nobody throughout most of history would have had any trouble accepting. Of course, today it's crazy. If you start saying the sun
Yes.
is alive and
Yes.
conscious, people think you're mad. But this is not really a controversial idea in the grand scheme of things. And if that's the case, the sun is, it's made of plasma. And if plasma contains some kind of consciousness, then, perhaps essentially what we are in is the sun's mind. The sun just doesn't begin or end in the actual kind of physical structure of the sun. Through its solar wind, it essentially has a kind of a field that extends about, I think it's about 120 astronomical units from the sun. And all the planets and all of this stuff is happening within this electromagnetically dynamic charged field. And if we were going to look for some kind of mechanism for astrology, this I think could be part of it. Like, rather than saying the planets are exerting forces directly on us, the planets, by dint of being trapped in the gravity with the sun, they exert a pull on the sun, and the sun exerts a pull on them. So the planets are actually affecting this roiling ball of plasma, which may be conscious. And then if you look at the sun's cycles, it has an 11-year solar cycle, and that is suspiciously close to the Jupiter cycle, right? So we have
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, you have to be suspicious of that. And so, is it that we are in the mind of the sun somehow, and the cycles of the planets are kind of the shifting consciousness of the sun, but then we are all instant sparks of that. And you can start to see how maybe there's a mechanism somewhere there.
And you kind of understand why the ancients worship the sun as well. That whole concept of that was life-giving. And they really did believe that Jupiter was the king of the gods, and the sun was there to give us life, therefore on some level was conscious. I'm interested in that, but also this whole concept of the Fibonacci numbers. Now, I know you spoke about that in your own video about how astrology works that you did for your own people on your channel. But I'm really interested in the fact that everything seems to follow this concept of the Fibonacci numbers. And I was looking at the storm Melissa. And in fact, I think it was Stephen Burns who's saying it follows the pattern, that incredible storm follows the Fibonacci sequence. Now, can you do a little bit more in-depth explanation about all of this?
I will certainly try. So this is something that I've used for a while to explain to people who are looking for mechanisms, like another frame, another way of perhaps seeing how astrology might work. So we have this phenomenon of the Fibonacci sequence, which is basically a sequence of numbers, and it begins with 0 and 1, and then each subsequent number is the sum of the previous two. So we have 0, 1, 1, and then 1 plus 1 is 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, and so on. So we have these numbers. And the other thing about the Fibonacci sequence, which you see in nature a lot, by the way, you look at sort of sunflowers and all sorts of organic structures, you'll see the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it appears in nature, and also the golden ratio, which is a number that's derived from the Fibonacci sequence. If you keep going with the Fibonacci sequence forever, and you divide any sort of say number infinitely large by the previous one, you get this golden ratio. It's about 1.6 or something. And we see that also all over nature. And it's also we naturally perceive it as very beautiful. So
Yes.
there are natural geometries. Essentially, the point is that there is natural geometry to the world, not only to life, but
Yes.
also to the layout of the planets as well, and to their distances from the sun and so forth. They're actually predictable according to this formula called the Titius-Bode law as well, at least up to Neptune. So there are natural geometries of things in space, and all astrology is saying is that there are also natural geometries of,
Yeah.
say, cyclic meaning. Events in
Yeah.
time also obey these same geometries, which are inherent to the structure of the cosmos.
Now, I heard this, Steve Judd told me this, so I haven't actually followed it up, but he said that in the cosmos, he calls it the divine um, uh, geometry, is accurate to 99 degrees. So it is so accurate, whatever this geometry is, these these patterns that are formed. I'm curious about that as well. And the
I
other
haven't,
thing oh,
yeah,
go on, go on.
no, I hadn't heard that before. I'm sure Steve,
Yeah,
uh, like yeah, is right about that. But I could believe it. I can believe it. It's
yes,
very. It seems very clear that there are natural geometries to the way things
yes.
are
Because
structured.
knock them out a degree and it wouldn't work. I mean, it's simply spectacular how our planetary system and the cycles of the planet and our relationship with them on the Earth and relationship with the sun works. It's spectacular if you think about it.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
The I mean, you can't really practice astrology and not end up with the sense that there is intelligence behind, like magnificent intelligence behind the design and layout of the cosmos.
Oh my, well, this obviously brings us on to Christopher Bache, who wrote LSD and the Mind of the Universe. Now, I devoured that book and I know that you've read it. And I think it was one of the most impactful books I've ever read on consciousness, actually. And he said during the book, during his trips, and he had a lot, he had hundreds of trips. And anybody who's not read the book, he's a professor, I can't remember, a psychology, I think, an American professor. And he decided to experiment really with himself and LSD, and his wife, I think, was his sitter to keep him safe. And he wanted to go into the depth of what was possible to understand about our relationship with the universe and the universe itself. It's a fascinating book. But he said that he encountered vast cosmic intelligences during these visions, who love and have created us. I wasn't sure about that, but love us. And I wasn't sure about that. And I just wanted your take about that, because it all feeds in to what we're talking about. I think
Yeah,
about consciousness and the mystery of it.
absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I was really taken by Christopher Bache as well. That book LSD and the Mind of the Universe. It really blew my mind. And he, as you say, he finds himself. He goes into all these different kinds of realms
Well,
after
yeah,
going through really intense processes of purification, which are harrowing from the descriptions. But
yeah,
a couple of times he kind of ends up in this realm where he's, as you say, encountering these vast sort of behemoths that seem to be somehow creating reality. And he said, I think he uses the phrase like they're living through us as well,
yes,
and
yes,
which sound kind of like archetypes as well.
yes,
That they're sort of archetypal forces and structures, but also beings, intelligent beings, and that's also clear. And so one of the things that you can't escape from concluding if you read Beish is that there are intelligent beings at other levels of existence that are partly also responsible for the creation of the world. And what struck me about that is that I I don't really think you can explain astrology with just a mechanism, like
Mm.
in the world that we're in,
Mm.
because so often you get the feeling that there are intelligences involved in kind of orchestrating and coordinating things, because it doesn't feel like a sense of like forces being exerted on us. Like often the things that happen,
Yeah.
they require like, you know, we have to have somehow been maneuvered to where we are right now, and you have to have had to have seen what I've done like in my work for you to reach out to me. And I was, you know, funnily enough, just as when you reached out to me, I was planning a live stream about how astrology works, and you emailed me about this without knowing that at all. And you know, obviously, you know, anyone who's into astrology will have seen this kind of thing 10,000 times. But there's
Yeah.
some sense of like coordination, I think. Like it's not just being pushed around by forces and mechanisms. There are greater intelligences which can see the big picture. And of course, that's what the ancients would have said. And that's
Yes.
why, you know, the idea of like why the planets are named after gods and
Yes.
beings of powerful celestial beings and so forth.
I think you know what's so interesting about the human mind, we have to make a story to make sense of it. We can't just live with great mystery. It's too mind-blowing. And they obviously, I would imagine they felt the same. So they made these wonderful archetypal stories up to kind of make sense of it all. And it does that. And in astrology, it does, Venus is the archetypal planet of love. And that makes sense of how we connect with love when we're looking at somebody's chart, or with all the planetary level. I'm fascinated by that, but also I think for me, I have to bring in one of my pet my pet things about how astrology work, which is bringing in, and I have to thank Judith Hill for this, because she introduced me into his work. This is Burl Payne, and he was an author and a researcher of alternative health and consciousness studies. He died a while ago now. And he was also an avid astrologer, and he really wanted to look at the different, or the intersection between astrology, physics, and biology. And he proposed, this is how it may work, is that the same hydrogen atoms found throughout the cosmos are also present in our bodies, and therefore our cells might receive planetary vibrations, the imprint at the moment, but it has to be at the moment of birth. So that's has to be, how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean that one is new to me as well. And you know, I heard that from you, and you heard that
Mm,
from Judith Hill. So I've got to thank both of you for that.
yeah.
It's really, you know, it's a really interesting idea. And it's, you know, it sounds kind of plausible, but I don't know about the whole sort of imprint idea. I'm less personally less keen on that.
Okay.
You know, I think it's. I don't know if you need a sort of mechanism of astrological imprint for things to work. You could say that mm, it's more about you incarnate in the right body, which is being born at that moment, because it happens to sort of contain the quality of the moment that you need. But I don't know if we need like a sort of imprinting process, because we have all these other physical mechanisms which kind of seem to have to do with like how we end up as we are, how, you know, how our body develops, our genes and our
Yeah.
nature and nurture and stuff. So I don't know. You know, I mean, I don't rule anything out because this is a great mystery,
Well,
and yeah,
I mean, it really reminded me. I've said this to you before, isn't it, about Moto's work on water consciousness, and how he sent sort of hate thoughts to the crystals and love thoughts to the crystals as experiments, and the hate crystals all crunched and were horrible patterns, and the love crystals were all beautiful and gorgeous and flowy. And I'm fascinated by that. So that
yeah,
got me thinking, Dan. If the divine intelligence is so, and the divine intelligence is somehow I'm going to use the word imprinted at the moment of our birth. You know, if we have, let's say, a very afflicted Mars or a very afflicted Venus, and so, or let's go for Venus, you know, and she's not a happy bunny, then that plays out on our life until we we learn how to deal with that, you know, the hand that we're dealt with. And that sort of ties in with me a little bit with Emoto's work. We're not sent, I don't know, it's so difficult to put into words, isn't it?
It is. Well, Emoto's work's really interesting because I think it also does highlight the importance of consciousness and meaning and intention.
Yes.
You know that you like there's a difference in meaning. If you look at Emoto's work, they uh, kind of send different intentions to water, if
Yes.
I'm not mistaken, or they write different
Yes.
things on the water, and then it late when it's frozen, it kind of displays
Yeah.
different characteristics based on what the intention was. But there's a
Yeah.
sense of kind of meaning as well. That certain there's a difference in meaning between love and hate,
Yes.
and that's a really fundamental sort of archetypal difference. And for me, I think one of the things that astrology shows is that meaning and narrative aren't just in our heads, they are probably how the universe actually works. They're somehow written right into it. And I was just reading a quote from David Byrne of
Oh,
Talking
yeah.
Heads the other day. Yeah, who I really like as a musician and artist,
Yeah.
and he was just saying that he has the intuition that somehow poetry is probably fundamental to the cosmos and how it works. And he's almost saying something similar there, I think, to what we see in astrology. We see that the narratives that we have in our head are somehow
Yeah.
reflected. There is narrative out there in the interactions between the planets and between their aspects and their relationships. So
Yes. Yes. It's interesting. Yes. I mean, musicians are, well, many, I can't say all of them, but many musicians, they are geniuses in what they can, how they bring through, I suppose, messages or feelings, and they can actually translate that into something that's deeply impactful to all our lives. I'm fascinated by that. And where does that come from? You know, that must come, does it? And a lot of songwriters and musicians will say it's not me. It's comes from somewhere else. And I don't know about you, Dan, when I'm reading charts, sometimes it's not me. Do you ever get that feeling?
I do
Mm,
sometimes, yeah.
yeah.
And it's something that I've also noticed from studying world astrology, mundane astrology, in that what you kind of identify when you're studying cycles is you see that certain, say, impulses and
Yeah.
processes aren't really contained by individuals. They run through whole societies and groups of people,
Yeah.
and they can also leap from one society to another. Like one society can take the baton from another one, and it's like the idea wants to keep moving forward and being expressed in the world, and it will express itself through people. It doesn't necessarily come from people. So I
Yes.
definitely think,
Through people.
yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh gosh.
yes.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Yeah.
this all gets to this sort of notion of the universe being potentially also another frame, is that things are fundamentally informational. You'll hear all these people these days
Yeah.
talking about, is the world a simulation? And I don't personally buy that, although it has maybe simulation-like aspects to it. And I think astrology does also somehow point towards the primacy of information, especially when you look at like asteroid astrology and you see the crazy stuff that happens with that. Just to give an
Yes.
example,
Yeah.
my mother's name is the asteroid with my mother's name is conjunct my IC within less than a degree. And I just move in the process of moving house at the moment, and I'm having a return of the asteroid that's called House. And so you kind of run into all
Yeah.
this crazy stuff with asteroid astrology, and it's all it seems to be is just a word attached to a body
Yes.
in the sky, and that's somehow enough for it to work. So you also have to reckon with this sort of informational framework, which also I think points towards the importance of narrative and interpretation again. So there's no one explanation, I think, that kind of
No,
covers all the bases.
it's interesting. Asteroids have never worked for me. They just don't work. They do not tally up with my chart. And I did an essay on courtesans, and I looked up Casanova, and most of them had Casanova very prominent in their chart. And there was another
Mm.
asteroid as well, and I can't remember now what it was. But it was very prominent, and I found that was fascinating. But personally, for me, they don't work. So, but which is interesting because they work for you. So
Yes, they
again,
work.
you know, I think
It's a strange phenomenon.
it, I just want to, before we move on to talk about radio receivers, us possibly being radio receivers, I just want to go back to Christopher Bache and these beings that, and I just want your take on it. These beings that apparently created us and love and perhaps influence our lives. I don't know. I mean, are we talking about here extraterrestrials?
Yes, I mean, I think if you read Base, you don't really. I'm not sure you get the impression that they're extraterrestrials exactly. I think it just feels more like they're spiritual beings that are
Yeah.
in kind of parallel realms or realms
Yes.
that are somehow more fundamental than this one and more closer to source. And then I think there's sort of some sort of model that I have in my head, and I don't know how much sense it really even makes, but it just keeps coming into my head, so I'll keep saying it. It
Yes.
feels to me like there's like a that there are our world is kind of like projected from another one, and I'm sure that's not my idea. That's a lot of philosophers' ideas. It's like a
Mm.
projection, and there are higher, more or say more fundamental dimensions to reality from which this one is projected. And as you get to our world, we are more and more differentiated. Our lives are kind of these really convoluted stories with all these sort of meanderings and weird happenings and these very long stories. And yet the archetypal world, the mythological world, seems to me it's like somehow simpler and more fundamental. The relations between the gods are kind of like again less complex and differentiated, and between their world and ours there's this sort of projection process, and everything gets kind of more and more convoluted and complex when you get into this world. But astrology seems to point us to this more fundamental archetypal world that is the world of these higher dimensional beings. I'll take another toke or
Yes.
another bong hit and try and tell you more.
I mean, what's come to me as you were speaking, literally what came in, it helps us to make sense of it all. But the trouble is, we can't make sense of astrology, so that doesn't quite work. But that's what, so astrology helps us make sense of who we are, but it doesn't
Yeah,
explain how it works.
no, it doesn't. We don't get privy to that. But I think like when you really start thinking deeply about it, you realize that it's no shame that we can't explain astrology. People love to point fingers and go, "You don't even know how it works." Well,
Yeah.
we don't even know how the cosmos in general works. We don't even know how consciousness works. Scientists have not
Yes.
been able to explain or solve the hard problem of consciousness, as they call it. They don't know how consciousness works, and as far as I'm concerned, astrology is fundamentally a kind of art science of
Yeah.
consciousness. We can't explain that, so we can't explain astrology, and that's just how it is at this point in time that we're in. But
Yeah.
it doesn't invalidate it.
But I think I'm right in saying that quantum scientists have now discovered the sort of the fundamental building blocks of life, which are going down to subatomic quarks. I love the whole concept of quarks are alive, and if they are present in all of life, all that is, that's what builds life, then everything is alive. And
Yes,
so
and
is, go on.
yeah, no, I think that's yeah, this is the sort of panpsychist
Yes,
framework, which
yes,
probably is where you need to start from. Like
yeah,
and I think part of the reason that we can't explain astrology is because our fundamental, and I say our, I'm talking about when we're kind of trying to like do sort of science's work a little bit here, but like
yeah,
if you have fundamentally flawed assumptions about reality, you're not going to be able to explain astrology. If you're coming from the perspective that it's all just kind of like, you know, bits of stuff, atoms, molecules, forces, you're not going to be able to explain it. You have to start from a framework which is
yeah,
correct.
yeah, yeah. And great mystery is great mystery, and thank goodness for great mystery. But before
Yeah.
I just want to before we go any further onto this, Arthur M. Young. Now, I found him very interesting because he was the inventor of the Bell helicopter, so no slouch in the world of physics. And he was also an astrologer. And again, thank you, Judith Hill, for introducing me to him. And he says that he describes humans were kind of natural radio receivers. So, kind of biological instruments, if you like, attuned to receive and interpret information from the cosmos. Now, he also proposed that consciousness evolves in a kind of 12-fold process, which takes us back to the ancient sort of that image of the man, man, with you're starting at Aries and then the 12-fold astrological signs unfolding down through the body. So I'm fascinated by that. So kind of what he says, sort of moving from pure potential into form to life and self-awareness, kind of before we go back home, whatever home is, to this sort of sense of freedom, but expanded awareness. So life is this lived out experience of the 12-fold process. Now, where are you with that?
You know, this is another one of these ideas that you introduced me to. I hadn't heard about this before I read your article on the subject. So on the 12-fold process, I mean, it is fascinating to see 12
Yes.
embedded so deeply into like human cells, I think, which as Jung says. But I was what I do have some thoughts about is more the sort of radio receiver thing. The radio is it's a kind of electromagnetic radiation, and so I think maybe electromagnetic fields is probably a pretty promising way to go in terms of trying to find an explanation. Because now, as I was talking about before, right, we have the sun and its solar wind creating this heliosphere, this electromagnetically charged zone with these kind of roiling fields in it, and we know that animals respond to electromagnetism.
Yeah.
They navigate by
Yeah.
electromagnetism, so they're picking up
Yeah.
information from electromagnetic fields. So it doesn't take it's not a big leap to think, well, maybe we also take information from electromagnetic fields. So
Yeah.
we have the Earth's electromagnetic field being influenced by that of the sun, which is in turn influenced by the planets that are pulling on it, in their
Yeah.
cycles. So if we think about it as all these interacting fields and information potentially being transferred through those fields, then yeah, maybe we are sort of heading towards some kind of explanation. I'm not sure I don't think that solves the kind of coordination problem, as I like to say, the sort of the need for some kind of higher level intelligences to kind of put two people in the right kind of places in front of each other somehow to for the thing that the transit signifies to happen, which just seems to happen all the time. I don't know,
Yes,
but
yes,
yeah, it does
yes.
seem to be kind of fertile ground. So I think it's whatever the explanation, or if it happens to be, it will probably involve that.
Yes. Well, he did point out, because we're composed mainly, well, we're composed of water, minerals, and the electromagnetic field, that, that does point into possibly water carrying, I don't know, transmitting, I don't know. But it's interesting, isn't it? And maybe that is our antennae, a mixture of all of that, the electromagnetic fields, the minerals that we have, the water that we are walking antennae. I kind of like the idea of walking around as a radio receiver for the cosmos.
Yeah, yeah,
It's kind of
and
fun.
yeah, I like it too. You're making me think of the character Danny from Withnail Nye now, who's talking about why he has his hair long, and he says, "Hair are your aerials. They pick up signals from the cosmos
Ooh.
and transmit them directly into the brain." Um, I'm not sure it is the hair, but yeah, maybe, as you say, it is the water molecules that make up our,
Yeah.
our body. But yeah, I mean, information transfer through fields,
Plasma?
sure.
Plasma?
With a bit of plasma
Bit of
flown in,
plasma thrown
thrown
in.
in.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Oh God, I just love this. Now, also, I did when I was thinking about all of this, I got into this whole concept that plasma created twinkling stars, and that creates beauty. And we look up and we go, "Oh, twinkling stars, how absolutely wonderful!" And then I got into the whole thing with the Heart Math Institute, which has done a lot of research into the moments of beauty and awe, and like gazing at the night sky, for instance, shifts the heart's electromagnetic field. And these shifts apparently help us to open up our mind and our heart, and it calms our nervous system and deepens our sense of connection to something far more than we. So, and I started thinking about the sixth sense of beauty, which is honored with the Native American Indian teachings and traditions. And, without beauty, we can't thrive. And I get that. And maybe, oh, I don't know, maybe there is this divine interconnectedness with the cosmos and with all life through the concept of plasma and beauty. Now, this is way out, by the way, but I just wondered, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that somehow the matters of the heart aren't really integral to astrology, because obviously they're integral to life. And
Yeah,
this is why in the live stream that I gave to my members, I actually structured the stream and the different explanations or potential explanations that I gave for how astrology works,
yeah,
using the four elements as well as spirit. So
yeah,
the water element, say, I think is also important and has to have its due. And you do hear, I think it was, well, it was actually you who suggested that we have this kind of endless, say, interplay between love and strife. And
yes. And Empedocles, yes, Emped. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Yeah, pre-Socrates, he was saying that. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and that just sort of that then kind of points me towards like the way that the universe is structured as is this kind of big nested hierarchy of cycles, which are kind of expanding and contracting. So we have kind of like life giving and taken away. In traditional astrology, you talk of the benefics and the malefics, the life givers and the destroyers, and there's this necessary in any kind of cyclical process. Things have to flower, and then there has to be a paring
yes,
away as well, and that just seems to be really fundamental. Like this, and the cycle, you find it at every single level of the cosmos,
yeah,
from the infinitely small to the infinitely large. It cycles all the way up, cycles of kind of expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. And maybe you could put it as kind of
Yes.
love and strife, just sort of these sort of really fundamental forces which astrology seems to speak to quite eloquently.
Yeah. Well, he did say that, but in his understanding of how we incarnate, he believed that we incarnated through the cross of matter, through the cross of matter, through the four elements, and the four elements play a hugely important part in that. But he did say for him that that it was the concept of love that was the glue that kept us, our spirit, in incarnation. And then I kind of thought, then I had a sort of vision of love being this kind of carrot that's dangled in front of us, like we're donkeys, it's going towards the carrot, never gets to it. And that love leads us forward. And it does feel like love is so important in all our lives, whether we don't have it. And obviously, we're always yearning for it and searching for it. So I feel there's something here about that too. And that
Yeah.
takes us to the Hermetic teachings. Well, let's not go there, but we'll be here all day. But what do you think about that?
Well, it's really tempting, isn't it, to kind of say, well, love is somehow fundamental,
Yeah.
and maybe it is, but I can't help but think that it's possible to frame astrology in a way that kind of centers any one of the elements somehow, and that you need all of them. And there's a reason why we have the four elements in our astrology, and even indeed in the sort of the way that we're structured and built and made up of, and why
Yeah.
the Greeks identified those four elements. It's because they're all playing their role, and you can't say it's just fundamentally this one. It's just actually water, like it, or it's just matter interacting with it. Other it's just kind of
Yeah.
forces and matter, a la Earth. It's just information, a la air. It's just
Yeah.
kind of creativity and will, fire, and it's just love and connection. Say water. You can't boil it down to. I don't think you can boil it down to one of them. That's been my, and I could be wrong about that, but my guess
Yeah.
is that it won't ever happen. But it will happen a bit in fashion. Like there seem to be fashions towards favoring one element over another, not necessarily in astrological explanations, but just in explanations about what the cosmos is. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So right now, it's really common and fashionable for people to say, the world is a simulation. And not so long ago, say in the 19th century, people would have said the world is a great machine. And it seems to
Yes.
be dependent on what is our technology like at that time. What is the greatest thing we can imagine at that time? And I've also noticed it seems to maybe have something to do with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, because we're in this sort of age of air now, and
Yeah.
suddenly it's all about information. And
Yeah.
before we're in an age of Earth,
Yeah.
and it's all mechanics and clockwork and so forth. So I wouldn't be surprised if in say a couple of 100 years, when we're in an age of water, and then people are really sort of centering the aspect of care, love, connection, feelings, and so forth,
Intuition, psychic
intuitions.
awareness. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and saying that's what it's fundamentally about. And I think it can be seen as as any of them. It really just
Yeah.
depends on the frame that you choose.
God damn, we could go on for hours, couldn't we? This is so interesting. I just want to just very quickly to tell you that I've done some work with Felicity Warner, who is set up the school of soul midwives, and she's trained hundreds and hundreds of people to sit beside the dying. And she's also done a study into the dying process, and she's looking at how the dying release the elements. And first of all, they release the earth element because they start retracting from life. Then they start to release the water element, this sort of sense, I can't be bothered anymore. And then they start to release the fire element. There can be these spurts of energy before people die. And finally, they release the air element, the last breath, which kind of takes you back to the first breath of life. I just find that, and I've just tied that all up with astrology, which I won't go into at the moment, but I just find that fascinating that, we were born into the cross of matter in a certain way, and then we die in a certain way through the elements. I
Wow,
mean,
that's
another
incredible.
massive conversation to have at another point. Yeah. Dan, I have loved this conversation. It's only 8:30 in the morning for me. And I don't know where it is for you in the afternoon in Thailand, but it's just fabulous. Just to finish off, is there anything that you'd like to say about how astrology works?
What more can I say that I haven't already said?
Is there anything
We've covered quite a lot of ground
Yeah.
for sure, and I'm just trying to think if there are any other aspects to it that I haven't covered. One thing that this isn't so much how it works, but maybe like why it sort of works as it does, that I've been thinking about recently is just the fact that the cosmos is structured as this huge, endless hierarchy of nested cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles, and it seems to me that it's what we're looking at is this kind of like some sort of creativity engine where the combinations of the quality of the moment that are dictated by these different cycles that are all layered on top of each other are never the same. Everything always changes, and you can go up and up and up and up and get higher level cycles. You can look at the cycles of the planets, but then you can go above that to the precessional cycle and the astrological ages. You can go above that, and we're in a galactic cycle, and then even the universe itself, it is said by certain physicists. I think Roger Penrose has this theory that that there's infinite sequence of big bangs and contractions and bangs and contractions, which is what the Vedic texts tell us as well, that there are these different sort of expressions of the universe that come to expand and die off again. But it just seems to me that it's just like this is how you would design the cosmos if you wanted to kind of have this endlessly sort of creative process that never produces the sort of same moment twice, because at every level there is a higher cycle and a higher cycle, and the cyclic part of it itself seems to pertain to the way that you couldn't have sort of just infinite growth. There needs to be this endless kind of process of creative destruction, and so that's not really like how astrology works, but it's maybe a bit on like why it sort of is as it is.
And great mystery persists.
It does. We haven't solved it.
We haven't solved it, but at least we've had a damn good talk about it.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Dan, thank you so much. As I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. And to everybody listening, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Take care for now. Bye.